Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of IDTALK for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning in to the podcast, I welcome you and I hope that today's episode is one that will have you coming back for more episodes. And if you are a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, as always, I welcome you back and I hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, enlightening, and as always, insightful. So before we get to the main event, people, just a reminder for those who are on YouTube, please make sure you hit that red subscribe button so you can get future notifications on new episodes. If you're listening from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, make sure you subscribe there as well. And if you would like to help us continue to grow this platform through donation, here are a few avenues you can take. The first one is through Cash App, where you can put in the handle $IDTALK4ED. You could also donate through Venmo using the handle @KwameSM, or you can go through PayPal with the URL paypal.me/KwameSM. And for those who have been with this podcast from day one and have seen the growth and you've been able to benefit from the content from here, you can become a patron. We have a whole community on Patreon, and through that community, you'll be able to get access to early releases on future episodes. You'll be able to get behind the scenes look of how we do things at Identity Talk, and it's just a great way to get some perks that no one else will be able to get. So make sure you go check out Patreon, and that information will be in the episode notes. Thank you again. And oh yeah, if you want to go ahead and check out past and future episodes of the podcast, you can go to our main website at IDTALK4EDucators.com. I also have a book that's going to be coming out in less than 2 months called Learning to Relearn, Supporting Identity in a Culturally Affirming Classroom. This, I believe, is my best work. I've written a lot of articles. I've written many blogs and have written a couple of books before this one, but this is the one that really speaks to the essence and the mission of what I'm doing with Identity Talk. And if you're somebody who is really about centering the humanity of different students' identities, whether you are a teacher, whether you are a parent, a community member, if you're really about the humanity of young people and making sure that we're affirming that, this is a book that you want to have in your library. And it is now available on Amazon and through the Routledge website. You could get a paperback copy, or if you're someone that likes to be digital, you can get yourself the Kindle version, which is now available as well. And to learn more about the book, the chapters, and some of the major themes of the book, you can go to our main website at learningtorelearn.com, and you'll be able to get access to some free resources to help you get started with this school year as far as helping students understand their identities as well as others. Thank you for the support. All right, y'all. So we got another special guest. This is someone who I've had a chance to know over the years, particularly when I was still in the classroom teaching in Boston. She is somebody who has a long career in supporting school leaders, supporting teachers who aspire to be school leaders. And she's just an overall dope person to have in your circle, especially when it comes down to education and making sure that we're making it equitable for everybody involved. So without further ado, I want to bring on Dr. Jill Harrison Berg to the podcast so she can share with us her journey, what brought her in education, and what she's doing right now. So let's bring Jill on. Hello.
Hello. How are you, Kwame?
Listen, I can't complain. How you feeling?
Great. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Yes. I feel like we just saw each other.
We saw each other in our crowd. That was amazing.
Yes. And we'll definitely get into that whole experience. Shout out to Ghana ASCD for putting together their inaugural International Educator Summit, an event which Jill played a major role in organizing. For those who didn't get the privilege of being a part of that experience, let's start there because I feel like there's so much to talk about with that.
Yes.
So let the audience know about how long did it take for this vision to come a reality. So we can start from the infant stages up until last July, when we got it up on the ground.
Absolutely. So, of course, ASCD is the largest professional association in education besides the teachers' unions and has affiliates all over the US and all over the globe. But it was 2017, I believe, when an affiliate was started by Charles Yeboah in Ghana. Now, I was on the way to Ghana just on a vacation with my family. We wanted to visit Ghana for the year of return in 2019. And some of my pals at ASCD said, hey, you really got to meet Charles Yeboah. He's amazing. You'll love meeting him. Of course, I called him up and he was in New York while I was in Accra. So we didn't get a chance to connect in person, but we connected on Zoom and we just connected heart to heart about the things that we love about schooling and learning and leadership. And so we actually put together a conference. We rented the big convention hall downtown in Accra, and we were all ready for people to come in April 2020. And there was one fateful phone call in March, early March, I said to Charles, I think we might have to delay this conference a week or two because there's something happening around the globe. Of course, that conference didn't happen, but it sparked the idea. It was the genesis of the idea. And in the meantime, we had that was actually a leadership focused conference versus the summit, which was now really all about teaching, learning, and leadership. Our leadership ideas turned into a project that was a leadership development project that got the attention of the Ministry of Education. And I was able to collaborate and really become a senior advisor for Ghana ASCD as we developed this leadership development program and really piloted something that could become a licensure program, credentialing program for the country, for the Ministry of Education. So in doing so, we engaged 400 participants and another 100 people in the facilitation and curriculum writing. I really supported them to create something that would be by Ghanaian leaders for Ghanaian leaders. And the networking and connections that happened were just magic. People were really just thirsty for that professional community. And we said, why don't we, now that this leadership development program has raised up thirst for professional community, why don't we return to that conference idea, that one that we had put on hold? Let's move forward with that idea and really ride the wave of what's happening with our National Educational Leadership Institute. That's what happened. I would say it was about June or July of 2023 when we first said, let's convene a team to do this. And what was very nice is, of course, ASCD has affiliates, again, across the U.S., many of whom have really successful conferences, powerful affiliates. And we had some really generous advisors from those places. Craig Martin from Massachusetts. We had Claire Carter from Virginia. We had folks from New Jersey as well, Ryan Nevius. And those folks came to our meetings, online meetings, and really helped us to think about what we would need to do to produce a really powerful professional learning conference. And a year of planning, people again came out of the woodwork from Ghana, from the US to help plan it. And then in terms of participants, we ended up having over 700 people over the course of, we had a 3-day conference. And the day after that, the Minister of Education was so excited that we had all this capacity tapped right there in Accra that he added a 1-day masterclass, and he funded leaders from the 93 prioritized schools. We would call them turnaround schools. They're called prioritized schools. So he had them come from all over the country to Accra to have a 1-day extension to this conference. And it was just a tremendous experience. As I say, we had, 500 Ghanaian leaders, teachers and leaders, about 100 people from the US, and about 100 people from other countries, mostly West African countries, but also Canada, Jamaica, the UK, places like that as well. So it was just tremendous.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Oof, it was. Every now and then I still reflect on how massive and how impactful that experience was. It still gives me goosebumps to know that something of that magnitude took place in Accra. And I'm just thinking about the synergy that was created, the merging of different worlds, and seeing what's possible when you're able to have that type of Pan-African connection within this realm of education. It was beautiful to witness, and we'll definitely get deeper and deeper into that as we get into the conversation. I want to go ahead and get to the beginning, because before you became Dr. Jill Harrison Berg. You had humble beginnings,
Yeah.
and we want to get to know a little bit about those humble beginnings. So just talk to us about your upbringing and what that was like.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in New Jersey, just outside of New York suburb. And I'm from one of those families that is a whole family of educators. We've got it in our genes, we got it in our bones. On one side, we can go back at least 5 generations to see, 5 generations of teachers. On the other side, at least 3 generations. But a fun, quick story is just that my parents actually met because my grandmothers were both New York City public school teachers at the same school. And they got together and said, hey, I got a son. And the other one said, I got a daughter. So next thing you know, my parents just had their 60th wedding anniversary. So that was a few years ago. But yeah, but the education bug is just bitten us in our family. And it's just what I sort of meant to do. I definitely got pushback about teaching from a number of people when I went to college. I went to Harvard, and a lot of people said, what are you going to become a teacher for? You're a Black person going to Harvard, you could do anything you want to do. It used to be that Black folks, high achieving Black folks didn't have any choices. You were going to either become, especially women, you're going to become a nurse or a teacher, and those are the only choices you have. Now you can be anything you want to be. And I said, well, what I want to be is a teacher. What's more powerful than teaching, right? Education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. And we know this world needs some changing. So education was, for me, also been an important part of my religious faith. I'm a member of the Baha'i faith. And again, education is just seen as essential to supporting each and every human on this planet be able to think and achieve and grow and love in a way that's going to advance our world. So education is just where it's at for me. And as I went on through college, I did some, teacher training and became a Cambridge public school teacher. And as part of the Cambridge public, I skipped something though. I actually taught in Brazil for 2 years. Escola das Nações in Brasilia. It was an amazing both living and teaching and traveling experience. But then I did come back to Cambridge public schools, where I taught in all for 11 years before I went on to pursue a doctorate. I don't know if you want me to tell you a little bit about that as well, or you had other questions about it.
Hey, this is your town, so you want to talk about it, go ahead. We here.
I feel like it's all one story. And the reason is because when I was a teacher in Cambridge, I always noticed that Cambridge public schools would pay money to teachers from other districts to come in and share their expertise. And after I kind of grew some expertise, and especially after I achieved national board certification, other districts would pay me to go there. And I thought, why is it that everybody always wants to bring in people from outside instead of recognizing or even cultivating expertise from within? Frankly, Cambridge was cultivating expertise, but not tapping it. When I went to Harvard and I became a researcher with the project on the next generation of teachers, and that was a cadre of, it ended up being almost 20 people who worked with Susan Moore Johnson to think about questions about the teacher development pipeline, really to be thinking about what might help people want to teach today, what might help people want to stay in teaching, and what might help people want to be excellent teachers, because we don't actually want people who don't expect to be excellent teachers, right? And within that project, I began to examine, sort of these questions about expertise, how schools were and weren't really tapping expertise, and recognizing that most schools and districts do what my district did, which is build capacity in me and then not recognize it. And in fact, they were doing that with my doctoral program, because as a Cambridge public school teacher, I had the opportunity to be there on a fellowship. They not only paid my tuition, but they paid me half my salary while I studied. And after my 3 years of coursework, they said to me, actually it's 2 years of coursework. In my third year, they said, okay, we have a new superintendent. Would you like to come back full-time to teach or quit? And I thought, well, would you like to know what I've been studying at your expense? You've kind of put a lot of money into me. And they never once asked, even when I offered to tell them, they didn't want to know. They just wanted to know if I wanted to come back full-time. Now, of course, I knew that if I came back full-time, I'd never get a dissertation written. So I quit. But again, if I'm the superintendent of Cambridge, I'm going to be thinking, okay, we have some literacy needs, for example. Let me send some people with this resource to develop literacy expertise and have them come back and tap that. But generally, teachers' professional learning and expertise is seen as an individual benefit, not an organizational asset. And that really was my experience in the classroom and my experience in schools, and also became the topic of my research. And it's what I still work on today. I'm always trying to help schools and districts think more strategically about the assets that they have, which the human beings who they work with, not only the expertise, but the experiences, the positionalities, and all of that richness that can help make the school better serve the diverse students that it works with.
So then naturally, my next question would be, what role does the school leader play in building a culture where teachers and faculty members are motivated to build their capacity to become professional learning leaders? And I'm only asking this because I've been in schools where the principal wants you to just stay in your lane. Like, I need you in the classroom. You don't need to be leading any kind of professional development because you are one of my strongest teachers. So I need you to stay here in this classroom and take care of these kids that I don't want to take care of. You know, my nerves. I've had those situations, real talk. So I guess that's my question. Like, what role does the principal or school leader play in ensuring that teachers are able to build that capacity?
So that is such an important question. And my work for the first 15 years or so, I really was focused on teacher leadership, research on teacher leadership, running institutes, trainings, courses, writing articles, etc., for teacher leaders specifically to build their expertise. What I've discovered is that the most of the work that needs to happen is really with the school leader. They create the conditions that allow this to happen or to not happen. And for that reason, I have kind of shifted my coaching work where I'm working with, I generally work in places where I can also work with teacher leaders, but my focus is really on the school and district leaders to help them think about the will, skill, and the ability. So on both the part of the leader and the teacher, who consider all teachers leaders. So we're thinking about the will in terms of what might help them want to lead. You know that there are lots of teachers who would prefer to just keep their heads down and as you said, stay in their lane, or principals who prefer that teachers do that. Skill, it takes some knowledge and skills beyond basic classroom teaching skills to be able to lead, especially lead adults who may not want to be doing what it is that we're doing, or maybe afraid to do something like look at data. And then the ability has to do with the logistics. Are we creating the time? Are we providing compensation and really making it possible in those ways? So those are kind of three areas that I work on: will, skill, and ability. And I'm thinking both about the school leader as well as the teacher. It's a little bit of a dance. Sometimes I think of myself as like a marriage counselor, because sometimes I'm working with teacher leaders and they say, oh, if the principal would only da, 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 da. Then I'll talk to the principal and say, could you get teachers to understand? And it's true that they have complementary perspectives, but both really important perspectives. And so we just have to help a school community to be able to make themselves vulnerable enough to not think that they know everything, to train them how to listen. Listen is an important skill. And really the reason to do that is students, is always putting students at the center so that we understand this isn't about me or more about you. This is about what our students need us to be doing right now.
Right. And I feel like in order for that to work, you need a school leader who values distributive leadership. They have no problem delegating responsibilities that they would have to take care of to either their AP or their dean or even some of the teacher leaders within their building. So I feel like that has to be the type of environment that you'd have to be in order to have opportunities to strengthen that muscle.
Right. Absolutely. And not every leader wants to do that. I mean, I definitely work in districts where this is the superintendent's understanding of how, I mean, you really can't get to equity. You can't possibly create conditions for each and every student to learn in a school that doesn't have this structure, that it isn't have distributed leadership. And so where there's a superintendent who's supportive of it, I'm able to coach principals who either are hesitant or more than hesitant, maybe obstinate about it. And then my work there is to really help them to see the difference that it can make. You can engage in an inquiry cycle where small shifts monitored so that they can see the difference that it's making for students can really change the tide. If they actually see that small shifts that they made have made a difference, then they're often willing to take it on. And in a place where their colleagues are all thinking a little bit in a more distributed way, they also will be more willing to take risks. But I run up against one or two people who really just want to hold all the cards. And at the end of the day, you're going to look at their student data and you're going to say, you know what? This isn't primarily about you having a job. This is about the students learning, right?
So this season, Identity Talk for Educators Live will be including ad spots for businesses, products, and events that are adding significant value to their communities. And here's the catch. You don't have to be an educator or an education-based business to be a part of this. We're looking for people who are just doing great work in the community, and we want to use our platform as a way to amplify their work. So if you are an entrepreneur or you know of an entrepreneur who is doing just that, bring them in our direction. Have them reach out to us. If they want to learn more about their ad spots and how they can get themselves promoted on this platform, they can contact myself, Kwame at identitytalkforeducators.com. I'll say it one more time. It is Kwame at identitytalkforeducators.com. Hope to hear from you, and let's keep on amplifying our work and building each other up. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
And look what I came across as I was cleaning up the other day. God, I had this.
That's right.
That's how you know I have way too many books.
Yeah.
Like this was that was deep in the pile. So this is one of Dr. Jill's books for those who are not on YouTube but are listening. This is Leading in Sync, Teacher Leaders and Principals Working Together for Student Learning. And this is exactly what we're talking about right now.
That's right.
And I know there are colleagues that I've had in the past, and I'm sure you've come across some folks who you knew had what it took to be professional learning leaders. They had the qualities, they had the disposition necessary to take on the work. I'm curious to know is, what did you recognize about yourself that let you know that you are ready to be a professional learning leader? What were those specific qualities that you discovered?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there are certain qualities, like, I like to think that most of the skills are the actual teachable skills, and things like being an excellent listener and things like building your repertoire of ways of getting people to interact with one another. These are all some of the key skills. Also, trust building, of course, that's a key part. It's all chapter 5 in Leading in Sync that you just held up there. Sometimes people think that trust building and creating a place in which people can really be vulnerable enough to take the risks they need to learn is just something that either happens or doesn't happen. But my experience and my research shows that there's a lot that's known actually about how to build trust, and it can be built pretty quickly. When I think about sort of how I do think of it as a little bit of a secret superpower that I have to build a community of learners. And a lot of times when I'll lead, whether it's meetings or institutes or conferences, even people come away and they say, oh, but this was such a great group. Aren't we lucky that we had an amazing group of people this time? And I always smile and nod, but I spend a lot of time making stealth moves to ensure that kind of vibe is going to happen in the groups that I work with. And as I say, it has to do with understanding how trust is built, understanding that it's built through interaction. What kind of repertoire of ways do we have for getting people to interact right away? First, with respect and personal regard, so that they can understand and connect on what makes us both human, but also what makes us both unique. And then quickly learning about one another's expertise. I talked before about how oftentimes in a school building, people don't know who knows what that might be useful to them. And in any group, we can create ways, we can embed ways. They don't have to be corny icebreakers. There are ways we can embed into the meeting systems that allow each of us to know what each other is actually really good at. And we begin to lean in and depend on each other and step up with competence and integrity, those two other kinds of trust. So I think that really becomes the piece. It has taken me over, this career of 30 years in education to little by little do some research, engage in some inquiry cycles, etc., to help me understand and unpack and make my tacit knowledge about building community explicit. These are all things I sort of did in my classroom when I taught middle school, and I was creating an environment that would really be full of thirsty learners where students were taking charge of their own learning journeys and learning from each other. And I took it to adults, but over time helped myself to understand a little bit about how and why, what's under the hood of creating those learning communities. And that's a lot what's sort of in Leading and Sync, and also in my third book, which is Uprooting Instructional Inequity. That is a book for designing professional learning, but the key of that is creating the container that allows people to really actually have the conversation about what's not working. People will often be willing to come and talk about a great idea I had or share a best practice. If I can't come to the meeting and share my worst practice, tell about the kid I couldn't reach, then I'm not going to be able to help that kid. So we have to get there quickly, and we got to do that through building trust.
Now, the last point you mentioned, doesn't that speak to how certain school leaders take a paternalistic approach to leadership, where they're not eliciting the input of their teachers and they're just creating the agenda for what we're going to talk about, and then it becomes this mandate that we all dread coming to because it's speaking to us or relating to what we need at this particular time. This is one of those things that I believe has been a recurring theme in many people's teaching careers. Just those PDs that empty, but because they're mandate, you have to be there and you just kind of go through the motions. So I'm wondering how much of a role that plays in creating that type of environment that you're speaking of.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely an issue. And as I say, I mean, I think you keep referencing, Leading and Sync, the beginning couple of chapters there. Again, that's really written for school leaders, teacher leaders as well. I think you have to have a touchstone text. So you have the same language to talk about stuff. Those first couple of chapters really are designed to help school leaders who might not want to share that leadership, to help them to understand why they need to. And part of that is that by virtue of your roles, you have access to different information. Teachers know what it's like to implement this curriculum with these students and this setting at this time. And they know, what, little Janie is like before she starts popping off as she does every day. She knows like the antecedents to that behavior. But principals, by virtue of their role, they don't know those things. They're not going to have that same experience, but they know things teachers don't. They have a systems-wide view. They spend time in every classroom, ideally, and they know things that are confidential that teachers can't know. Right. There's going to be district mandates as well that they'll, they're in some district meetings. They have some idea of like where the superintendent's trying to go with their strategy. So this is why teachers' expertise and leaders' expertise is really complementary, and they need each other. They have to have ways to connect. A lot of schools are not structured for that. I mean, it can happen through individual teacher leader roles, but having a robust integrated teaming structure where every grade level has their team meetings, and maybe representatives of each grade level meet together with the principal on an instructional leadership team that's school wide. That's the kind of structure that I recommend to ensure that if somebody sees something that could help us do a better job, they know exactly how to get that information to the person who needs it, right? But too often, if we see something that we feel could be a small adjustment that could make a big difference, but we don't feel like we can tell them. Either logistically we can't tell them, or because of our relationship we can't tell them. And that's a shame for everyone, right? The students are losing in the end, but it's a shame for the adults involved as well if we can't actually have the conversations that we need to improve the school.
And to your point, I think in the end, it's all about how do you build systems that will allow for teachers to not only build their capacity, but also have the opportunity to have those kind of roles.
Exactly. Yeah. Because we can't assume that the school is going to improve just by teachers like taking the opportunity to make an individual appointment with the principal to tell them some advice, right? That's not how that works. We have to create a learning organization. So we have to have routines where we are regularly in conversation, where we're having macro and micro conversations. So it does require some new kinds of thinking and some new kinds of habits of work for principals. They've got a lot of learning to do.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I want to go ahead and shift to this question. And this is one that I was hoping would have been talked about at this last presidential debate. But of course, every 4 years, we always waiting for these presidential candidates to really devote some time to the state of education, particularly in the United States. And I was waiting for almost 2 hours and not one mention of education, which I thought was interesting because you have this Project 2025 document that's out there. We're talking over 900 pages. And this is something that's changed the way that we look at education as we know it. And it's a threat to our children.
Yeah.
So for it to not be part of the agenda is disheartening. But I wanted to take some time to talk about it from the perspective of a school leader. So how has the socio-political climate that I just described in our country shifted your ability to consult with different school leaders and teachers? Because I know you work with a lot of different districts, and there are guidelines that they have that don't allow for the kind of teaching that we desire for our children to experience.
Yeah, I mean, these are all big questions, and obviously in a few months we'll see what we're dealing with. Are we going to be dismantling the Department of Education, or are we going to be making some strides in these areas? But I would say that what feels like increasing polarization of American, that not only have we become more diverse, but we've also become more divided, and that's a shame. Becoming more diverse should be our richness. It's just what I talk about around again in Leading in Sync, about how the more differences that we have, the stronger we become, the more perspectives, the more information that we have, and we should be able to make better and stronger decisions if we can build the relationships that we need to share about the distinctions and differences that we see and learn from them. But instead, we're seeing polarization. We're seeing people kind of hunkering down and even unwilling to listen. I thought that was funny that Trump said he says that he hasn't read 2025, which is 900 something pages. I doubt he would read it.
He's not even claiming it. He's saying that he has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, but one would think that you would want to read it. It just as a document, right? No matter whose site it's on, if it's this, especially if your vice presidential candidate pick had such a hand in it, that you would have read it. But people sort of just hunker down and don't really want to share with one another. I think some of the things that I've been doing is entering these conversations about equity and difference and diversity without leading the conversation about race. I think ultimately we have to talk about race, and I don't avoid it, but it often can just trigger people's amygdalas, and once they have an amygdala hijack, then they can't really listen. They start to shut down. But to just give some examples I like to give an example of an instructional leadership team I worked on, and they were thinking about family engagement. And it was actually kind of a large ILT. It had like 16 people on it. But the ideas they were coming up with really sounded odd to me. And I said to them, how many of you here actually have had school-age children? None of them had. And I said, it's a kind of diversity you don't think about. But if you're making decisions about parent engagement throughout your whole school for your 700-person school community, and nobody at the table has had that positionality, has had that experience of being on the other side of a parent conference, knowing what it's like to put your most precious, this person who reminds you of all the people you love in one. It's like little bundle of love. And I send them off to school and I don't know what they're doing there. There's a lot there. And it affects how I think about being a parent. And so that's just an example of how I can talk about the value of diversity. People get that. They understand, it would be important to have that perspective. And so once you sort of come up with some of those examples, then we can talk about, well, what would it be like then to have a community, or we're serving 70% multilingual learners, and nobody in our instructional leadership team knows what it's like to not understand the conversation that they're in, or to have a second language experience. So I'm finding different kinds of entry points, kind of some lower stakes entry points, but ones that really people can connect with. Another sometimes I use is just generational stuff. There's a lot of stuff that Gen Zs get or don't get that Gen Yers do, for that kind of thing. So these gives us great ways of lowering the stakes to talk about the value of it. And then once they get a couple of ideas about the value and importance of diversity, then we can talk about what were some of the structural inequities that continue to exist that make it even more challenging for a topic like race. So another thing is that I do use a lot of you could call them CRT type principles in my work, but I definitely don't use the term CRT or even the common terms that are used in that. Right. So one of the key ideas has to do with like the permanence of racism, simply this notion notion that racism is just infused in the DNA of how this country is built. And people, not everybody likes to talk about it that way. That kind of sounds very negative. And again, it can be amygdala hijack. So I'll just talk about race vigilance. This is simply this notion that we have to constantly be vigilant to think about the ways in which race plays out in our worlds and in our decisions. And so sometimes shifts in language like that can really be helpful in keeping the work going, keeping the work that we need to do on the concepts going without creating red flags for people or alarm bells going off in their brains that shut them down.
Yeah, you got to feed it in different ways because you already have the checklist of words you should not say. So we have to camouflage in some way, somehow. But
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you. When you lead with race, you lose them right away because race is the one thing that we talk about all the time. But then there are all these other identity markers. So I know when we have these conversations, it's important to understand how important intersectionality is. Shout out to Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw for even giving us the language to talk about it and how it connects to how we view our society, which is informed by dominant culture. Now, if I were to say it like that, oh man, they're gonna kick me out. So maybe a different way that's a bit more friendly. But that's what we're talking about, though. We're essentially talking about that, and we have to get to that point. We're gonna have the tough conversation,
Yeah.
but we can't leave with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's another example, though, is when I think about intersectionality, just this idea of, I guess it has to do with the generational piece that I mentioned. A lot of more mature folks, people my age, aren't as comfortable in the online world. And for Gen Zers, that's just an MO for them. They're just like, it's kind of more how they're used to. And so the marginalization that veteran folks feel, that older folks feel, when I say millennials and boomers and things feel in an online environment, is another sort of just example, a place that you can sort of play with that to help people to recognize what it means, to how it feels to be marginalized. And in terms of that intersectionality piece, they can be thinking, I can have them be thinking about what are some places where you're online, maybe using technology, but you feel empowered using it, and what are some others where you feel disempowered using it. And it helps them to see that it doesn't have to do with being like a tech person or not being a tech person, but sometimes context matters, or communicating with my family. I'm comfortable in the tech world, but communicating at work on work topics or with certain online environments, maybe they're less comfortable. So just helping people, point out to people that this idea about like dominance and marginalization happens in lots of ways, not just in race ways.
For sure.
Yeah.
I want to actually go back in time. So this question is one that I usually ask earlier in the podcast, but I feel like this is a good opportunity to ask right now as we start to wrap things up. So I want to go back to Jill as a child. I want to go back to your K-12 experience.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know if there were any struggles that you were having, whether it be internal or external, that made it difficult for you to be your full authentic self, not just in the classroom or in the school community, but even other settings.
Well, I mean, I had a pretty unusual upbringing, and I guess the experience of struggle was really when I got to college and discovered that it was unusual, because of course I was just me. I didn't know that other people had a different way, which is that I was really raised to be human. I was raised to be proud of my I was Afro-American in the 70s, right? I was born in the 60s and grew up through the 70s in a predominantly white suburb. And my parents taught me all about Black history. I did some Saturday school as well to really grow in my identity as a Black woman, a young Black woman or a Black girl. I never felt like someone had to have Black skin in order for me to see myself in them, though, because I would see something else about them. It was just, skin was just one aspect of me. I wouldn't expect eye color or some other aspect to be limiting how I would see myself. So it's just not something that I think. I did have a sense of systemic inequities and the fact that Black folks were sort of more likely to start without a level playing field. But I also grew up during affirmative action, remember, in the 70s. And so there were a lot of programs that I was a part of even that, aimed to address that. So the other thing, I was born, as I mentioned earlier, I was raised in the Baha'i faith in a community that was surrounded by Christians and Jews. And my understanding was just that everybody believed different things. And it was just interesting to learn about others. And I would go to temple and I would go to church, and my friends would come with me to where I would worship. And one of our teachings is sort of let your vision be world embracing rather than confined to your own self. And so this was a part of my understanding. All the people I considered my aunties and my uncles they were Black, they were white, they were Persian, Puerto Rican, and Jewish. They were from all over. I think because of that, it made me easier for me to be my authentic self, because the rules and that constrained everyone else didn't apply to me. I was always other than others anyway, so I could kind of create my own pathway. But when I got to college, I was confused about the fact there were so many people there at Harvard who never met a Black person before. And I was like, what does that even, what does that mean? What was that like? And what does that mean about you and me now? Like, what? And also, I remember going to the freshman Black table, which I enjoyed for a lot of the year. And then at one point, there was talk about kicking out a friend because she was biracial. And I was like, how does that work? The world experiences her as a Black person, but because she's biracial, she can't participate in the freshman Black table. So there were a lot of things that I struggled with around that. But that was really almost, I want to say, like, I don't know, almost theoretical. It was sort of just it was just a way to think in new ways about how others were thinking about diversity in the world, because I had done so much thinking about it myself. And it wasn't that I didn't experience racist incidents growing up too. I remember there were definitely racist incidents. My mom's just amazing. I remember her, she just advocate. And she also, I can remember her calling people ignorant. And I remember one time she was really mad about someone or something was a racist incident, and she kept saying, oh, they're so ignorant, and that interested me, because her perspective when somebody acts in racist ways, engages in racist behaviors, is that if they knew better, they would do better. And that's why it's important to be a teacher. So go back full circle to the beginning of our conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Education is the weapon we need to use to change the world. And it just, for education to help educate people about the value of diversity and about how we can all help make this world a better place through conversation, and not shutting down a conversation with the kinds of racist behaviors and statements that people make, but have a conversation. That's a place where education needs to happen. In my coaching, I always say you have to get curious, not furious. And so when something does make me angry or frustrated, I just think, I wonder why they're thinking about it that way. Because there's some perspective they have.
So with all the challenges that are happening around us, and the fact that the world around us is changing, how do you continue to stay true to the teacher in you?
How do I continue to stay true? I'm going to say that I love learning. It's that curiosity piece again. We've got to stay curious and not furious. There's a lot of things you could be mad about right now going on in the world. I think the best teachers are learners. Mm-hmm. And so to stay true to the teacher in me, I'm going to just keep learning, keep staying curious, keep asking questions, keep talking to people, keep listening. And that would keep me whole, keep me grounded, keep me authentic.
All right. Y'all heard it from Dr. Jill Harrison Berg. And I thank you, Jill, for taking this time to speak with me. It's been a great conversation. And before I let you go, I want to give you an opportunity to just share with people how they can connect with you on social media, and also use this time to share your services and put a plug in that. So the floor is yours.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so I do work as a leadership coach and a school and systems consultant. I work in not only the Boston area and nationally, but as we've heard, I work in Ghana as well and other places. Always interested in partnerships with districts that are willing to become learning organizations, willing to really do the hard work of redesigning themselves so that they're maximizing the expertise and experiences of everyone within them. I've written a lot about that, and I mentioned Leading in Sync. I've got Uprooting Instructional Inequity. Here is my more recent book. My first book is about national national board certification, which I also believe is just a really important way of building our brains muscles for being inquiring minds, to being the kind of curious teachers that are excellent teachers. So those books are found at ASCD. I'm also on X, or used to be Twitter. My handle is at teachers_lead. Obviously in LinkedIn, you can look me up with my name, Jill Harrison Berg. And I'm hoping my website updates will be completed soon. The website you can go to is jhbergonline.com.
All right, there you go, y'all. So as she mentioned so humbly, she ain't hard to find.
That's right.
Google her. She's right
Mhm.
there. Yes, Jill, thank you so much. And on behalf of Dr. Jill Harrison Berg, I want to wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.
Thank you.